Jake Morrison sat alone in his salvage ship, drifting through the asteroid field near Sector 7, when the distress signal came through on his scanner, and he almost ignored it, because nothing good ever came from this part of space. But something made him change course and head toward the source. The signal was weak and broken up like whatever was sending it was barely holding together, and Jake had seen plenty of wrecks in his 5 years working the outer rim. But this was different because the frequency was strange, and not anything human ships used. When he finally spotted the vessel floating between two massive asteroids, his breath caught in his throat because the ship was beautiful in a way that made no sense, with its crystalline hull that seemed to glow from within, and strange symbols etched along its surface that hurt to look at, too. Long Jake brought his salvage ship closer and scanned for life signs, and his equipment went crazy, showing 3 weak signals aboard the dying vessel, and he knew he should call Earth Command and report this. But something told him there was no time because the ship was venting atmosphere and losing power fast. He suited up and crossed over to the strange vessel using his magnetic boots to walk along its hull until he found an airlock that was half open and sparking with energy that crackled like lightning. And inside the ship was even stranger, with walls that seemed alive and floors that glowed softly under his boots. The 3 survivors were in what looked like a command center, and Jake stopped dead when he saw them, because they were not human at all, but looked like the elves from old Earth stories, with pointed ears and faces too perfect to be real, and skin that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The oldest one was tall and fierce-looking, even while injured, with long silver hair and armor made of some metal that shifted colors, and beside her was a small creature, no bigger than a cat, but clearly a dragon with scales that burned like stars and eyes full of ancient intelligence. The second one had dark hair and wore robes covered in symbols that moved and changed, and she was unconscious, but her fingers twitched like she was reaching for something in her dreams. The youngest looked barely more than a child, with golden hair and green eyes that opened when Jake approached, and she gasped and tried to speak, but no sound came out, and Jake could see the fear in her face. Jake held up his hands to show he meant no harm, and he activated his suit translator, hoping it would work on whatever language these beings spoke, and after a moment the device beeped and started processing. The young one spoke again, and this time the translator kicked in, and Jake heard her say that they were dying and needed help, and that bad people were coming, and they had to leave now. Jake did not hesitate, because whatever these beings were, they needed help, and he was not the kind of man to leave people to die. So he started helping them up, and the dragon made a sound like chiming bells, and suddenly Jake felt warmth spread across his chest. The oldest one, who he would later learn was named Lily, grabbed his arm with surprising strength and said something urgent that the translator rendered as asking if he was truly willing to risk everything to save strangers. And Jake just nodded because talking seemed like a waste of time. Getting all 3 of them back to his ship was hard because the dark-haired one named Kate was completely unconscious and Lily could barely walk, despite trying to act strong and little. Maya, the youngest, kept looking back at their dying ship with tears in her eyes while the small dragon Ember flew around them making worried sounds. Once they were aboard his salvage vessel, Jake sealed the airlock and punched in coordinates for anywhere but here, and as his ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, he saw on his rear scanner that 3 massive warships had just appeared where they had been moments before. The warships were black and covered in weapons, and they started firing on the crystalline vessel, and Jake watched as the beautiful ship exploded in a flash of light that seemed to scream across space itself. Lily saw it too, and she made a sound of grief that was almost inhuman, and Ember the dragon landed on her shoulder and pressed against her neck, and Jake saw tears running down the warrior princess face. Maya was crying openly, and even Kate, who was still unconscious, seemed to sense what happened, because her face twisted in pain, and Jake felt like he had stepped into something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple rescue. He set course for Haven Station because it was the only place he knew where no government had authority, and where 3 alien refugees might be able to hide while he figured out what to do next. Lily finally looked at him with eyes that were both grateful and suspicious, and she asked through the translator why he had saved them when humans were supposed to be primitive and dangerous, and Jake just shrugged and said that leaving people to die was not something he could do. She studied him for a long moment, and then Ember the Star Dragon flew over to Jake and landed on his shoulder, and the small creature was surprisingly heavy and warm, and it looked into his eyes, and Jake felt something shift inside him like a door opening in his mind. Lily gasped and said something sharp in her language and grabbed Ember, but the dragon would not leave Jake's shoulder, and instead it pressed one small paw against his chest right over his heart, and Jake felt burning pain followed by strange energy flooding through him. When Ember finally flew back to Lily, there was a glowing mark on Jake's chest visible even through his suit, and Lily stared at it with an expression of shock and disbelief. She said that Ember had marked him and that this was impossible, because only Etherian nobility could be marked by a star dragon, and Jake was human, and humans were not supposed to be able to bond with dragons at all. Maya finally spoke up, saying that maybe the old laws were wrong and maybe humans were more than the ancient records claimed. And Kate stirred and opened her eyes and looked right at Jake, and said in a voice that sounded like it came from far away that she had seen this moment in her visions, and that Jake Morrison had just changed the fate of 2 entire civilizations. Jake wanted to ask what that meant, but alarms started blaring on his Haven station, hung in space like a massive metal city, and it was the perfect place to hide because no law existed here, and credits were the only thing that mattered, and Jake knew every dark corner of this place from his years working the salvage trade. He docked his ship in Bay 17, which was owned by an old friend named Carl, who asked no questions as long as you paid on time, and Jake transferred enough credits to keep Carl quiet for at least a month. Getting 3 alien princesses and a glowing dragon through the station without being noticed was harder than Jake expected because Lily refused to hide, even though her silver hair and pointed ears drew stares from everyone they passed. Maya stayed close to Jake and kept looking around with wide eyes at the mix of humans and alien traders that filled the corridors, and Ember sat on Lily's shoulder making small, threatening sounds at anyone who got too close. Kate walked between them with her eyes unfocused, like she was seeing something beyond the present moment, and twice she grabbed Jake's arm and steered him down different corridors, and both times they avoided security patrols. Jake led them to a small apartment he kept in the lower levels, and it was not much, but it was safe and had food and water and beds where the princesses could rest while he figured out their next move. Once inside, Lily finally let her guard down and collapsed onto one of the beds, and Jake could see how badly injured she really was, with burns across her arms and a deep cut along her ribs. Maya immediately went to her sister and placed her hands over the wounds, and green light flowed from her palms, and Jake watched in amazement as the injuries began to heal, right before his eyes. Kate sat cross-legged on the floor and closed her eyes and said she was looking through time to see if Caney forces had followed them to Haven Station, and Jake left them alone to go find medical supplies just in case. When he returned an hour later with food and proper bandages, he found Lily standing by the window looking out at the stars, and Ember was perched on the windowsill beside her, glowing softly in the darkness. She turned when he entered and thanked him in her own language, which the translator rendered as gratitude deeper than words, and then she asked why he had risked his life for strangers. Jake set down the supplies and said he had been a soldier once, and he learned that the only thing that mattered in the end was whether you helped people when they needed it, and Lily smiled at that and said he would have made a good Etherian warrior. She told him about her people and how they had ruled a vast empire for thousands of years, and how they had watched humanity grow from primitive tribes to spacefaring civilization, but never made contact because the old laws forbade it. The Etherian Empire was built on honor and tradition, and the royal family had dragon bonds that went back generations, and her father, the Emperor, had been a great and just ruler until his brother Caney betrayed him. Caney wanted power, and he made a deal with something dark and terrible, and he poisoned the Emperor and tried to kill all 3 princesses so no one could challenge his claim to the throne. They escaped because Kate saw the betrayal in her visions and warned them just in time, and they fled in an old scout ship. But Caney forces caught up to them and damaged their vessel. And that was when Jake found them. Lily explained that the dragon mark Ember gave him was a bond that would let him access Etherean powers, but it also made him a target because Caney would see him as a threat to be eliminated. Jake touched the glowing mark on his chest and asked what kind of powers, and Lily said she would teach him. But first he needed to understand what he was getting into. She showed him her abilities by drawing a blade made of pure energy from thin air, and the weapon hummed with power and lit up the dark room, and she moved through combat forms that were beautiful and deadly. At the same time, Ember flew around her, breathing small gouts of star fire that burned cold instead of hot. And Jake realized these beings were so far beyond human capability that it was almost scary. Maya joined them and explained that she could heal any living thing and communicate with animals and plants, and even feel the emotions of those around her, and she could sense that Jake was afraid, but also determined. Kate finally opened her eyes and said she had seen 3 possible futures, and in 2 of them, they all died within the next day. But in the 3rd, they survived and became something greater. She said Caney had placed a bounty on them and any human who helped them, and he was threatening to attack Earth if humanity gave the princesses sanctuary, and war was coming. Whether they wanted it or not, Jake felt his stomach drop because he had just brought danger to his entire species. But Lily placed her hand on his shoulder and said that Caney was going to attack humanity anyway because he needed a war to consolidate his power. The next morning, Jake went out to gather information, and what he learned made his blood run cold, because Caney's Shadow Fleet had arrived at Haven Station, and they were searching every ship and questioning every traitor. He rushed back to warn the princesses, but found the apartment surrounded by black armored soldiers, and he could hear sounds of fighting from inside. Jake did not think he just acted because that was who he was, and he pulled out his old military pistol and started firing, and the soldiers turned toward him, surprised that a human would attack them. Inside the apartment, Lily was fighting 3 soldiers at once with her energy blade, and Ember was breathing fire at 2 more, and Maya had created some kind of shield that protected Kate, who was chanting in her language with her hands moving in complex patterns. Jake burst through the door and shot 2 soldiers from behind, and Lily used the distraction to cut down her opponents, and together they fought their way to the window. Kate finished her chant, and time seemed to slow around them, and Jake could see the bullets from the soldier guns hanging in the air, moving impossibly slowly toward them. Lily grabbed Jake and Maya and jumped out the window with Ember flying beside them, and they fell 3 stories, but landed softly because Kate had slowed their fall to a gentle drift. They ran through the station with soldiers chasing them and more appearing around every corner, and Jake led them toward the docking bays where his ship waited. But when they arrived, Bay 17 was blocked by a massive warship, and soldiers were everywhere searching every vessel, and Jake knew they were trapped. Maya said she could feel a safe path through her connection to living things, and she led them down a maintenance tunnel that smelled terrible, but got them past the soldiers. They emerged near an old cargo bay that Jake had used once before, and inside was a battered transport ship that looked barely flight-worthy, but Jake knew it had hidden weapons and a military-grade engine. He hot-wired the ship while Lily and Ember kept watch, and Kate manipulated time to make the security systems think they were still locked when they were actually open. They launched just as the warship spotted them, and the chase was on with Jake pushing the transport to its limits and Lily and Ember providing covering fire from the weapons station. Kate sat in the co-pilot seat and called out warnings seconds before missiles arrived, giving Jake just enough time to dodge, and Maya created energy barriers that absorbed hits that should have destroyed them. The battle was intense and brutal, and Jake flew like he had back in his military days when death was always one mistake away, and slowly they pulled ahead of their pursuers. Lily destroyed 3 pursuing fighters with precise shots, and Ember flew outside the ship in the vacuum of space-breathing fire that melted hull, plating, and disabled weapons. Finally, they jumped to faster-than-light speed and escaped. But Jake knew this was just the beginning, because Kate had seen in her visions that Caney would never stop hunting them. As they traveled through the darkness between stars, Lily sat beside Jake and said he had fought well, and that his dragon mark was growing stronger, and soon he would be able to do things no human had ever done. She also said something else that made Jake heart race, and she said that by Etherian law, anyone marked by a royal dragon was considered worthy of joining the royal house. Jake asked what that meant, and Lily smiled and said it meant he was no longer just a salvage pilot running from his past, but someone who could change the future of 2 civilizations. Maya came forward and used her healing powers on Jake's old combat injuries, and he felt pain he had carried for years finally fade away. And she said she could sense that he had been hurt badly once, and that he blamed himself for something Jake told them about his time in Earth Defense Force, and how he had refused to abandon his crew during a suicide mission, and how his superiors dishonorably discharged him for disobeying orders even though he saved 30 lives. Lily said that honor meant doing what was right, even when it cost you everything, and that Jake was more honorable than most Etherian nobles she knew. The coordinates Kate provided led them to a massive structure floating in the void between stars, and Jake stared at it in wonder, because the facility was ancient beyond measure, with walls that seemed carved from a single piece of crystal. Lily gasped and said she recognized the design from old histories, and this was an Etherian outpost from before the Empire was even founded, and she thought all of these had been destroyed thousands of years ago. They docked carefully and entered through an airlock that activated automatically when Ember touched it with one glowing paw, and inside the facility came alive with lights and power humming through systems that had slept for ages. Kate walked through the halls like she knew where she was going, and she led them to a central chamber filled with data crystals and holographic displays that flickered to life. When they approached, Maya placed her hands on a console, and green energy flowed from her into the ancient systems, and suddenly information began downloading directly into her mind, and she gasped as knowledge filled her thoughts. The facility had been built by Etherian ancestors who did something forbidden, and they had come to this isolated place to conduct experiments that the Empire would never have allowed. Kate accessed the historical records, and what she found changed everything they thought they knew, because the Etherians had not just watched humanity develop, they had actively shaped it. Thousands of years ago, when humans were still primitive, the Etherian scientists had visited Earth and modified the genetic code of certain bloodlines, adding fragments of Etherian DNA to create hybrid potential. The goal was to create a warrior species that could one day stand as allies against something called the Void Scourge, which was an extra-dimensional threat that had destroyed the original Etherian homeworld. The experiment was supposed to be monitored and controlled, but a war broke out in the Empire, and the scientists were recalled, and the facility was abandoned, and Earth was left to develop on its own. But the modified genes remained dormant in human bloodlines, waiting for the right trigger to activate. And according to the records, the dragon mark was that trigger. Lily looked at Jake with new understanding and said that was why Ember chose him, because somehow he carried the ancient bloodline, and the dragon could sense the Etherian potential sleeping in his genes. Jake felt overwhelmed, because this meant everything he thought he knew about being human was wrong, and he was some kind of experiment created by an alien civilization for their own purposes. Maya sensed his distress and placed her hand on his arm and said that it did not matter how he came to be, because what mattered was who he chose to become, and right now he was choosing to help them. Kate said our records also contained training programs for activating hybrid abilities, and if Jake was willing, she could help him unlock the powers hidden in his genetic code. Over the next weeks, Jake trained harder than he ever had in his life, and Lily taught him to summon energy weapons like her blade, and at first all he could create were small sparks, but gradually the power grew. Ember was always near during training, and the dragon mark on his chest glowed brighter with each success, and Jake began to feel connected to the small creature in ways he could not explain. He learned to sense energy flows around him and to move faster than normal humans could, and to heal minor injuries by directing power through his body. Maya taught him to calm his mind and feel the living energy of the universe, and she said that humans had always had potential for these abilities but never knew how to access them. Kate showed him how to perceive time differently, and while he could not manipulate it like she could, he learned to slow his perception during combat, which made him much more effective. Lily sparred with him daily, and she was brutal in her training, because she said an enemy would not hold back, so neither would she, and Jake gained bruises and cuts, but he also gained skill. During a break from training, Lily and Jake sat together watching Ember play with holographic projections, and she asked him about his life before the rescue and what made him become a salvage pilot. Jake told her about growing up on a colony world and joining Earth Defense Force because he wanted to make a difference, and about the mission where he saved his crew but was punished for it. He said he learned that institutions cared more about following orders than doing what was right, and after his discharge, he could not go back to normal life, so he took to the stars. Lily said she understood, because she had also struggled with the rules and expectations of royal life, and sometimes she felt trapped by tradition and duty. She confessed that meeting Jake had shown her a different way of seeing things, because he acted from his heart, rather than following some predetermined path. They talked late into the night about their hopes and fears, and somewhere during that conversation, something shifted between them. And when Lily reached for his hand, Jake took it. Maya noticed the change and smiled knowingly but said nothing, and Kate saw it in her time visions and nodded like she had expected this all along. But their peace was shattered when alarms blared through the facility, and Kate screamed that Caney had found them and his fleet was approaching. Fast, Jake ran to the control room and saw on the displays that 6 massive warships had appeared nearby, and they were charging weapons. Lily said they had to defend the facility because the knowledge here could not fall into Caney hands, and if he learned about the human hybrid program, he would use it to create an army. They had only minutes to prepare, and Jake accessed the facility ancient defense systems, while Lily and Ember took position at the main weapons array. Kate went to the temporal controls and said she would try to slow down the attacking ships, but it would drain her power completely. Maya created energy shields around the critical systems, and Jake could feel her strain as she poured everything she had into protecting them. The first attack hit hard, and the facility shook, but the ancient shields held, and Jake fired back with weapons that had not been used in millennia. Beams of pure energy lanced out and struck the lead warship, and its shields collapsed under the assault, and the vessel broke apart in a brilliant explosion. Lily and Ember launched from the facility in a small fighter craft, and they danced through space, dodging fire and striking back with dragon flame and energy weapons. Jake watched through the sensors as Lily fought with grace and fury, and Ember had grown larger somehow, feeding on the power of combat. Kate activated her temporal field, and 3 of the attacking ships suddenly aged rapidly, their hulls corroding and systems failing as centuries passed in seconds. But the effort was too much, and Kate collapsed, and Maya had to run to her side, leaving the shields weakened. 2 ships broke through and landed boarding parties on the facility, and Jake grabbed his weapons and ran to intercept them. The battle inside was fierce and close quarters, and Jake used everything he had learned fighting alongside energy projections and enhanced speed and combat instinct that felt almost precognitive. He defeated the first wave, but more soldiers kept coming and he was being pushed back toward the central chamber. Then Lily and Ember burst through a wall and joined the fight, and together they were unstoppable, with Lily blade cutting through armor and Ember fire melting weapons. They fought their way to the main airlock and sealed it, but not before Jake took a bad hit to his shoulder, and he felt the dragon mark flare with heat. Ember landed on his injured shoulder and breathed cold fire directly into the wound, and instead of burning it, healed, knitting flesh and bone with star energy. The remaining warships retreated suddenly, and Jake thought they had won, but then Kate woke and screamed a warning. A transmission came through, and Kaney's face appeared on the screen, and he was smiling cruelly as he said that he was done playing games. He revealed that he had not come to capture them, but to send a message, and the message was that anyone who helped the princesses would die. Then he fired on a nearby human colony, and Jake watched in horror as the missiles struck and millions of lives were snuffed out in nuclear fire. Kaney said that was just the beginning, and every day the princesses remained free, he would destroy another human world until Earth surrendered them. Lily screamed in rage and anguish, and Ember roared with fury that shook the facility walls, and Jake felt something break inside him. Kate said through her tears that she saw only one path forward now, and they had to go to the Etherian homeworld and appeal directly to the Empress. Maya said that meant facing their mother and explaining everything, and there was a good chance the Empress would execute them all for breaking so many laws. But Lily looked at Jake and said they had no choice because Kaney had forced their hand and innocent people were dying. Jake agreed and said he would face whatever judgment came, because stopping Kaney was all that mattered now. They set course for the heart of the Etherian Empire, and Jake knew they were flying into the unknown. As they traveled, Lily held his hand and said that no matter what happened, she was glad she met him, and Jake said the same. Ember curled up between them, glowing softly, and for a moment they allowed themselves to hope that somehow everything would work out. The Etherian homeworld appeared before them like a jewel hanging in space, with crystalline cities that spiraled up from the surface and ships that moved like schools of fish through the orbital defenses. But they did not get close before a massive fleet surrounded them, and Jake counted over 50 warships, all bearing the royal crest, and he knew they were either about to be rescued or executed. A voice came over the communication system, and it was cold and commanding, and it demanded they surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Lily responded in her own language, and Jake could hear the strain in her voice as she identified herself and her sisters and requested an audience with Empress Victoria. There was a long silence, and then the voice said, the Empress was already on her way, and they should wait exactly where they were and not attempt to flee. Within an hour, a ship arrived that made all the warships look small by comparison, and it was shaped like a dragon with wings of energy and eyes that glowed with ancient power. This was the Empress' personal vessel, and Jake felt his courage waver because he was about to meet a being who had ruled an empire for over 1,000 years. They were brought aboard by silent guards who watched Jake with suspicion and hostility, and he realized he was probably the first human to ever set foot on this ship. The throne room was vast and beautiful, with walls that showed the stars themselves, and at the center sat Empress Victoria, and she was terrifying in her majesty. She looked similar to her daughters, but older and harder, with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall, and beside her throne stood Starfall, her dragon, and the creature was massive with scales like galaxies. Victoria looked at each of her daughters, and Jake saw relief flash across her face for just a moment before her expression became stern again. She spoke, and her voice filled the chamber, and she asked why her daughters had fled and why they brought a human before her throne. Lily stepped forward and explained everything about Kaney's betrayal and the murder of their father and the destruction of human colonies. Kate showed her visions of possible futures, and Maya shared the emotional truth of their journey through her empathic connection. Then it was Jake's turn to speak, and he stepped forward, knowing he might die in the next few moments, but refusing to show fear. He told Victoria about rescuing her daughters and about the dragon mark and about learning of his hybrid ancestry and about choosing to help despite the danger. Victoria studied him for a long time, and then she said something that shocked everyone, and she said she had known about Caney betrayal all along. She explained that she could not move against her brother without proof, and civil war would have torn the empire apart, so she allowed the princesses to flee, knowing they would either grow strong enough to face him or die trying. The test was never about survival, but about worthiness to rule, and Lily had proven herself by forming bonds with a human and showing that the old ways of isolation were wrong. But Victoria said she could not simply accept Jake's presence because the laws were ancient and sacred, and if she broke them without cause, the empire would fracture. So she challenged him to trials that would prove whether he was truly worthy of the dragon mark and of standing beside her daughter. The first trial was combat, and Jake faced 3 of the royal guard at once, and they were skilled warriors with centuries of training. He lasted longer than anyone expected, using everything Lily had taught him, and the dragon mark blazed on his chest, lending him strength and speed. He did not win, but he did not surrender either, and when he finally fell, he immediately got back up, ready to continue. Victoria nodded and said his warrior spirit was acceptable, and the second trial would test his mind. Kate led him to a chamber filled with puzzles and riddles that required understanding of Etherean history and culture and temporal mathematics. Jake struggled because much of it was beyond his education, but he approached each problem methodically and asked questions when he did not understand and refused to give up. He solved enough of the puzzles to satisfy Victoria, and she said his willingness to learn was admirable. The third trial was the hardest, because Maya took him to a meditation chamber and said he must face his own darkness and make peace with it. Jake entered a trance state and found himself reliving his worst memories and the mission where he had to choose between following orders and saving his crew. He saw the faces of the 30 people he saved, but also the faces of his commanders, who called him a traitor and stripped him of everything he had earned. He felt the shame and anger and loneliness of the years since and the voice of his doubt telling him he was not good enough. But then he felt warmth, and he saw Lily standing with him in his memory, and she said he had made the right choice, because honor meant doing what was right. He saw Maya and Kate and Ember, and he realized he had found a new family and a new purpose, and the past no longer had power over him. When he emerged from the trance, Victoria was waiting, and she said she saw truth in his eyes and he had passed the trials. But then she revealed the real test, and she said that Caney had sent her a message offering a truce if she handed over the princesses and Jake. She asked Jake what he thought she should do, and this was the moment that would determine everything. Jake looked at Lily and his friends, and then back at Victoria, and he said that she should do whatever was best for her people, even if that meant sacrificing him. He said he had made his choice when he rescued the princesses, and he did not regret it, and if his death would bring peace, then so be it. Victoria smiled for the first time, and she said that was the correct answer, because a true leader puts others before themselves. She stood from her throne and declared that Jake Morrison was worthy of his dragon mark and worthy of joining the royal house. But then alarms sounded throughout the ship, and reports came in that Caney fleet had entered the system and he was not coming to negotiate. He had allied with the Void Scourge, and they were pouring through rifts in space and attacking both Etherean worlds and human colonies simultaneously. Victoria's face hardened, and she said Caney had made his choice, and now she would make hers. She announced that she was offering humanity a formal alliance and sharing Etherean technology in exchange for military support. She said the time for hiding and following old laws was over because a new threat required a new approach. She looked at Jake and said he would be her bridge between humans and Ethereans, and he would command a mixed fleet in the coming war. Lily protested, saying Jake was not trained for command, but Victoria said he had something more important than training, and he had the ability to unite people. Kate said her visions showed this was the only path where both civilizations survived, and Maya said she could feel the rightness of the decision Victoria called for her war council, and Jake found himself standing among Etherian admirals and generals discussing strategy against an enemy he barely understood. The Void Scourge were beings from another dimension that fed on life energy, and they could not be reasoned with or negotiated with, only fought. Caney had promised them access to both Etherian and human populations in exchange for power to rule what remained. The combined forces would make their stand at Earth because that was where Caney was heading, and he intended to open a permanent rift above humanity's. Homeworld Victoria said she would take Starfall and her personal fleet to hold off the Scourge Vanguard, while Jake led strike teams against Caney flagship. Lily said she and Ember would fight at his side, and Kate and Maya would coordinate the defense using their abilities. As they prepared for battle, Victoria pulled Jake aside and said she was trusting him with her daughter's lives and with the future of two civilizations. She also said she knew about the bond forming between him and Lily, and while it broke every tradition she had ever known, she would not stand in their way. She said that sometimes the old ways had to die so something better could be born, and Jake was proof that change could be good. Jake thanked her and promised he would protect her daughters and do everything in his power to stop Kane. Victoria placed her hand on his shoulder and said she believed him, and that was why she was gambling everything on this alliance. The fleets assembled, and Jake stood on the bridge of a ship that combined human and Etherian technology, and he felt the weight of responsibility. Lily stood beside him, and Ember sat on the command console glowing brightly, and Kate and Maya were at their stations. As they jumped toward Earth and the coming battle, Jake realized that his simple life was gone forever, but he had found something better. He had found a purpose worth fighting for and people worth dying for, and maybe that was what being human had always meant. Earth hung in space surrounded by the combined fleet of humans and Etherians, and Jake felt a strange emotion seeing his homeworld defended by ships from two civilizations. The human commanders had been shocked when Empress Victoria arrived with her armada and offered alliance, but with Caney forces already attacking colonies, they accepted quickly. Now over 500 ships from both species waited in formation, and Jake stood on the bridge of the flagship with Lily beside him, and Ember perched on his shoulder. Kate sat at the tactical station, her eyes glowing as she looked through multiple time streams, searching for the moment when Caney would arrive. Maya was in the medical bay, preparing to coordinate healing efforts across the entire fleet, using her abilities amplified by Etherian technology. The wait was terrible, because everyone knew what was coming, but not when, and the tension built until it felt like the universe itself was holding its breath. Then reality tore open, and Caney fleet emerged. And it was larger than anyone expected, with hundreds of warships, and behind them came the Void Scourge. The Scourge ships were wrong in a way that hurt to look at, with geometries that did not exist in normal space, and they leaked darkness that consumed light. Victoria's voice came over all channels, and she gave a speech about unity and courage and fighting for the future, and both human and Etherian crews cheered. The battle began, and it was chaos on a scale Jake had never imagined, with thousands of ships firing and energy beams crossing space in deadly patterns. Jake commanded his strike force of 20 ships, both human and Etherian, and they flew in tight formation toward Caney massive flagship. Lily was at the weapons station, and she coordinated fire with deadly precision, and ships that got in their way were destroyed or forced to retreat. Ember had grown to the size of a small shuttle, and flew alongside their ship breathing starfire that melted enemy hulls and disabled weapons. Kate used her temporal abilities to slow missiles and speed up their own ships and create zones where time flowed differently, giving them tactical advantage. They fought through 3 defensive lines, and Jake lost 2 ships to concentrated fire, but they pressed on because stopping Caney was all that mattered. Meanwhile, Victoria and Starfall fought the Scourge vanguard, and the ancient dragon was magnificent in battle-breathing cosmic fire that burned away the dimensional entities. Human carriers launched fighters by the thousands, and Etherean capital ships fired beam weapons that cut through enemy formations like knives. Maya reached out through the living energy field and connected every medic and healer on both sides, creating a network that saved thousands of lives. The Scourge kept coming, though, and they began to overwhelm the defensive lines, and Jake saw on his displays that they were trying to reach Earth's surface. If they landed, the planet would be consumed in days and billions would die, so the fleet had to hold no matter the cost. Victoria made a decision that shocked everyone, and she ordered Starfall to charge directly into the rift and seal it from inside. Lily screamed, seeing her mother dragon fly into certain death, but Victoria's voice came through steady and strong, saying this was the only way. Starfall plunged into the rift, and its cosmic fire began burning the dimensional barriers, and the Scourge shrieked in a frequency that made reality shudder. The rift started closing but slowly, and Victoria said she would hold it as long as possible, but Jake had to stop Caney before he could open another. Jake pushed his ships to maximum speed, and they crashed through the final defensive screen around Caney flagship, taking heavy damage, but making it through. He led a boarding party of both human marines and Etherean warriors, and Lily and Ember came with him, refusing to stay behind. They fought through corridor after corridor, and Caney soldiers were fanatics willing to die to stop them, but nothing could stand against their combined assault. Jake had fully embraced the Dragon Mark power now, and he fought with energy blade in one hand and human plasma pistol in the other, merging both combat styles. Lily moved like a dancer of death, and together they were unstoppable, and Ember burned anyone who tried to flank them. They reached the command deck and found Caney waiting, and he was changed by the Scourge power with darkness leaking from his eyes. He said he had become something greater than Etherean, and he would remake both civilizations in his image. Lily challenged him to single combat, as was traditional, and Caney laughed and said, "Tradition died when their father did." He attacked with speed that defied physics, and Lily barely blocked, and Jake jumped in to help, but Caney was too strong. Then Ember roared, and the dragon mark on Jake's chest blazed with light so bright it filled the chamber. Jake felt power flood through him, and suddenly he understood what the mark truly was, and it was not just a bond, but a transformation. His DNA was rewriting itself in real time, and the dormant Etherean genes were activating, and he was becoming the bridge between species made flesh. Energy erupted from him in waves, and Caney was thrown back, and for the first time the traitor looked afraid. Jake and Lily attacked together, and their movements were perfectly synchronized, and they fought as one being with two bodies. Ember flew around Caney, breathing fire and creating barriers, and slowly they drove him back toward the viewport. Kate arrived with Maya, and together the sisters combined their powers, and Kate froze time around Caney, while Maya drained the Scourge corruption from his body. Caney screamed as the darkness left him, and he became just an Etherean again, and he fell to his knees defeated. Lily wanted to kill him, but Jake stopped her and said, they were better than that, and justice, not vengeance, was what mattered. Then alarms blared, because Caney had set the flagship to self-destruct, and they had seconds to escape. They ran back to their ship and launched just as the massive vessel exploded and the blast wave threw them toward Earth. Jake fought the controls and managed to stabilize, but they were falling toward the atmosphere, and shields were failing. Ember wrapped around the ship and used dragon fire to create a protective barrier, and they made a rough landing in what used to be North America. When they climbed out, they saw the battle still raging above, but the rift was almost closed, and Victoria and Starfall were still holding it. Then the rift sealed completely, and the Scourge were cut off, and the remaining enemy ships began to retreat or surrender. Victoria emerged from the closing rift barely alive, and Starfall was wounded, but they had succeeded, and the Empress was carried to the medical bay. The battle was won, but the cost was heavy, and both sides had lost thousands of ships and tens of thousands of lives. Jake stood on Earth soil for the first time in years, and Lily stood with him, and they watched as human and Etherian ships landed around them. Maya used her abilities to begin healing the wounded, and Kate coordinated relief efforts, using her visions to direct resources where they were needed. Most. Over the following weeks, Earth and the Etherian Empire began formal alliance talks, and Jake was at the center of negotiations. Victoria recovered, and she declared that Jake transformation proved the hybrid program had succeeded and that humans and Etherians were meant to unite. She offered him the title of Prince Consort and officially recognized his bond with Lily, and the two species celebrated their first cross-cultural union. Jake Morrison, the salvage pilot who once had nothing, was now one of the most important people in two civilizations, but he stayed humble and focused on helping rebuild and training others to use their hybrid abilities. Maya established an academy where humans with dormant Etherian genes could learn to awaken their powers. Kate became the ambassador between Earth and the Empire, and her visions guided both civilizations toward peaceful cooperation. Lily and Jake planned their future together, and Ember, who had grown to full size, became a symbol of the alliance between species. Victoria took personal interest in mentoring human leaders, and she shared knowledge that advanced humanity by centuries. But she also warned them that the Void Scourge would return, and they had only won one battle in a war that would last generations. Jake accepted this because he understood now that some fights never truly end, and all you can do is stand ready. He looked at Lily and his friends and the combined fleets patrolling Earth orbit, and he felt something he had not felt in years, hope for the future and faith that together they could face whatever came next. The story of how one human rescued 3 alien princesses and changed 2 civilizations became legend. Children of both species grew up hearing about Jake, courage and Lily honor, and the bond between a man and a dragon. And when new threats arose, as Victoria predicted, they faced them together as one people under 2 suns. Jake often thought back to that moment when he decided to answer a distress signal against all logic. That choice had cost him his old life, but given him something infinitely better. A family that spanned the stars, and a love that bridged impossible distance. And as he stood with Lily watching their 2 peoples work together to build a better future, he knew he would make the same choice again, because some things were worth any sacrifice, and some bonds were stronger than any law. He was no longer just human, and not quite Etherian, but something new. A bridge between worlds and proof that different peoples could become one. And that was the greatest victory of all. Kate said she had found something in her visions about a place where they could hide and learn and prepare for what was coming, and she gave Jake coordinates to a location deep in uncharted space. As Jake punched in the coordinates, he realized his quiet life of salvage and solitude was over, and whatever came next would either save 2 civilizations or destroy them both. Console because the black warships had locked onto his transponder and were following him through faster than light space. And he realized that saving these 3 princesses had just made him the most wanted man in the galaxy. Lily stood despite her injuries and placed her hand on his shoulder and said that if he helped them reach safety, she would teach him to use the dragon mark, and together they would find a way to stop her Uncle Caney from destroying everything. Jake looked at the 3 alien princesses and the small dragon and his tiny salvage ship being chased by warships that could vaporize him in seconds, and he made a choice that would change his life forever. He said they had a deal and punched the coordinates for Haven Station into his navigation system and prayed that they would make it there alive.